Well, you asked for it, and it is October after all. Time to head back to number 9 and take a deep dive into the Halloween episode Deadline. Inside Number 9's live special aired on the 28th of October 2018. The show's twists, along with its interactions on social media, made it one of the most thrilling TV moments of the year. While many of us missed it, including yours truly, Deadline is still a fascinating piece of television that uses some clever tricks and techniques to tell its story. I'm about to break it down in detail so we can see how it all comes together. Before we start, there will be spoilers for the whole episode. While the impact of Deadline can never quite be the same as it was on the night, I'd still urge you all to give it a watch. Just try your best to lose yourself in the moment. But before you do, I'd also recommend watching A Quiet Night In from Series 1 if you haven't already. For, reasons. So, by popular demand, well, sort of, it's still a very small channel, here's my analysis of Inside Number 9's Halloween special, Deadline. Part 1. The Setup. The official synopsis for Deadline goes as follows. When Arthur finds an old mobile phone in his local graveyard, he makes the mistake of trying to contact the owner. But some mysteries are best left unsolved, and as Halloween draws near, Arthur is plunged into a nightmare of his own making. Deadline was announced as a live Halloween episode, a format that might have sounded gimmicky had it come from anyone else. But Pemberton and Shearsmith are no strangers to live entertainment. After all, the League of Gentlemen began life as a stage show and has been performed across the UK many times, including a reunion tour earlier that year. As for seasonal specials, the two had previously written and starred in the Psychoville Halloween episode, plus Number 9 had already ruined Christmas. I'm still recovering from that ending. As with all live episodes, people watch Deadline with the knowledge and perhaps the anticipation that something might go wrong. And that's exactly what seemed to happen. A few minutes into the runtime, the sound began dropping out. An announcement was made to apologise for the technical difficulties, but said they would attempt to carry on with the programme as scheduled. Not long afterwards, the audio was lost completely, and the announcer returned to inform us that the broadcast had been cancelled. In its place, BBC Two would be showing a rerun of A Quiet Night In. At this point, around 20% of the audience switched off, only to miss one of the greatest twists that Number 9 has ever pulled. Here's what really happened. Steve Pemberton, Rhys Shearsmith and Stephanie Cole were all, in fact, performing live. The special effects, sounds and even the music were all being performed on set. However, the breakdowns, announcements and even the replacement episode were also part of the plan. This was revealed just after the 9-minute mark, I see what you did there, when the audio became eerily warped and ghoulish figures started appearing on screen. Yes, the Number 9 boys had done it again. Cutting to another programme, which would then go wrong, was one of the earliest ideas in Deadline's development. The easiest way to do this was for Number 9 to tamper with their own material, and so they chose the Series 1 episode A Quiet Night In for this purpose. Backup episodes are a real thing in live TV, so this was all quite convincing. In fact, had something gone genuinely wrong with Deadline, the BBC already had a replacement lined up. And guess which one they chose? Personally, I liked Steve and Rhys's original idea. Cut to a scene from Mrs. Brown's Boys, then have her decapitated by a ghost wielding a machete. Now, that'd be a licence fee well spent. A Quiet Night In also happened to be the perfect choice for this particular trick. It's one of the top rated episodes, so even if you'd seen it already, there was a good chance you'd stay and watch it again. It's also one of the funniest Number 9s, which caught viewers off guard when it began morphing itself into a horror. Best of all, because it's a virtually silent episode, it guaranteed that most viewers would be looking at the screen when the ghost started to appear. If they were on the lookout for more spooky details later on, then they wouldn't be disappointed. The idea was a risky one, no arguments there, but what it sacrificed in terms of ratings would become a unique talking point for the show. Did you watch Inside Number 9? Did you change channels when they started showing the repeats? Did you switch it back on because you heard through Twitter that something weird was happening? Each reaction became a story in itself, and these in turn became part of Deadline's legacy. The special was off to a very odd start, and it only got weirder from there. Part 2. The Ghosts in the Machine. The story of Deadline is told through a mosaic of live and found footage, including archive clips, continuity announcements and backstage camera feeds. Having abandoned the original premise by this point, the real narrative begins to emerge through the presentation of these seemingly disjointed scenes. Within its own universe, Steve and Reese appear to have lost control of the production, and something else seems to be taking over. Things get a little chaotic from here on, so I'm going to break it down for you scene by scene. As for the archive clips, we'll get back to those in more detail later. Here's what happens next. After the repeat is interrupted, we get a brief shot of the empty set before the announcer apologises once again for the ongoing problems. This time, her voice sounds audibly shaky, and we can hear the sound of whispering in the background. She asks, "Is someone there?" followed by a pause, a noise, and a loud scream, which is quickly cut off. We then jump to a backstage security camera as it silently pans left and right. A woman is sitting on the couch reading a script. This is Stephanie Cole, Steve and Reese's co-star for the episode. We get another shot of the empty set, and there appears to be someone standing in the centre, staring directly into the camera. Our first archive clip crackles into life. In it, we see a man placed in the stocks for what appears to be a comedy routine. The pillory collapses, with the man still inside, hurling him headfirst towards the ground. The stagehands rush to his aid, and everybody panics. Backstage, in the present day, we see Steve and Reese in their dressing room, apparently oblivious to what's been going on. We listen to them chatting while Reese manages to get online, only to get annoyed at his followers on Twitter who've been asking if this is all part of the twist. We're interrupted by the opening credits of the TV show Most Haunted. This time, they're on the set of the British soap opera Coronation Street. In the Rover's Return pub, a psychic medium claims to have sensed the death of a crew member, which he believes took place around 10 years ago. Backstage, Stephanie continues to read her script. On the wall above her is a picture of the Rover's Return, the same set we just visited in that last clip. A phone rings and Stephanie gets up to answer it. As the camera pans back, it shows the partly obscured image of a ghostly young girl. Stephanie answers the mobile phone prop from earlier in the episode. She begins talking to the caller, who says his name is Alan. Back in the dressing room, Steve is using his own phone to read about the supposed curse of Granada Studios. He lists incidents including an exorcism, a fire, a prop malfunction, and the untimely death of a crew worker named Alan Starr. According to Steve's sources, Alan hanged himself, not hung himself, from a lighting rig on Halloween night 10 years ago. Reese receives a message from Mark Gatiss on the League of Gentlemen WhatsApp group, which apparently is a real thing. Mark tells them to turn on BBC Two. When they find themselves looking at their own backstage footage, Reese puts a message out on Twitter asking if they're live on the BBC. The tweet does go out from his account. Steve changes the channel, and we see that Stephanie is still talking on the phone. We then cut to the Deadline rehearsal tape that was mentioned earlier. Steve's character is holding a knife, standing in a shower covered in blood. Stephanie arrives and finds the prop of Reese's severed head in the microwave before breaking character to ask some questions about the script. As Steve walks away, we see the blurry image of a man standing directly behind him. Back in the studio, Stephanie is off the phone and is sitting in a trance-like state. When Reese arrives, she begins rambling about spirits, claiming they've always been here, that they become stronger by invading the technology, and that we have to leave. Reese gets up to make some tea, and Stephanie picks up a knife. We then cut to Steve in the dressing room, who stares at his phone as the live footage of Stephanie plays behind him. Stephanie slits her own throat, and Steve doesn't even notice. In the mirror, we can see someone is stepping towards him. The next few scenes from the security cams appear to show us some poltergeist activity. A mop and bucket tips itself over next to a warning sign for live electrical equipment. A light swings back and forth in the deserted studio as a set of monitors displaying Stephanie's lifeless corpse start switching themselves off, one by one. We then return to Most Haunted, where a historian reports that thousands of bodies were buried in a nearby churchyard. He has no doubt that the burial site must have spread to the grounds beneath the studio. Backstage, we see an empty tea and coffee station, and a mysterious figure reflected in the mirror. We then cut to some black and white footage taken from an overhead static camera. A man dressed in black walks around an empty lot, telling someone, or something, that they have to leave. Next, we find ourselves on Reese's headcam, as he starts making tea next to the place where we saw the ghost. He hears some noises and wanders off to investigate. As he passes by the same place where we saw the bucket tipping, a metal gate closes itself behind him. In the storage area, Rhys discovers the prop of his severed head lying on the floor. It wasn't there a moment ago. Steve leaps out from the shadows wearing a mask and screaming the words, "Jump scare." After being pranked, Rhys briefly looks away. An alarm goes off and he looks back to see that Steve is being electrocuted. The chaos cuts to a BBC News report about the death of a studio worker named Alan Starr. Starr was a paranoid schizophrenic who believed that ghosts were taking over the studio. We hear some recorded samples of electronic voice phenomena, and the words "let us be" are clearly audible. This is followed by a much older news report showing a huge fire at Granada Studios. According to this report, the fire has destroyed sets, props and costumes belonging to the flagship drama series The Jewel in the Crown. Back in the studio, Rhys is running around and calling for help, saying that Steve isn't breathing. As he reaches the set, he finds Stephanie lying in a pool of blood. The lights and sound are cut, and Rhys's headcam switches to night vision. Images of strange human figures seem to appear and then disappear. Rhys races through a set designed to look like a graveyard before running up a flight of stairs. At the top, he comes face to face with a screaming ghoul and is hurled back down towards the cemetery. On his camera, we see the brief flashes of ghostly beings standing all around. We then see a clip of a much calmer Rhys being interviewed for the One show. The footage appears to be fairly recent. When the presenter asks him if he believes in ghosts, he answers that no, he does not. A short clip from A Quiet Night In loops over and over again. The footage speeds up and the sound reaches a crescendo before the screen turns to black and a voice in the darkness whispers, "Let us be." We end on a technical error notice and the warped background music continues to play as the credits roll. Though its storytelling methods are unorthodox, the real plot of Deadline is actually quite straightforward. The ghosts of Granada Studios have crossed over and have hijacked Number 9's Halloween broadcast. They're angered by the crew's presence on their final resting place and are prepared to drive them out by any means necessary, as they've done in the past. They can manipulate objects, communicate through the phone lines, and transmit images and videos live on the channel, perhaps in an effort to tell their story or as a warning to any other would-be intruders. By the end of the night, the spirits of Granada appear to have claimed 4 victims: Stephanie Cole, Steve Pemberton, Rhys Shearsmith, and an unnamed continuity announcer. Perhaps now they can rest in peace. Part 3. Fact and Fiction. After its initial broadcast, Deadline drew many comparisons with Ghostwatch, a work of fiction so convincing that it saw thousands of terrified viewers jamming the BBC switchboard back in 1992. While it might be more difficult to fool viewers these days, Deadline used modern media and technology to its advantage, engaging its viewers on Twitter and mentioning several incidents that, if you googled them, would appear to be true. Real-life events and urban myths are woven seamlessly into Deadline's narrative, along with some fictional elements that were inspired by the above. And if that sounds confusing, that's because it is. Deadline left many viewers wondering what was real and what wasn't, so we're going to try and clear that up once and for all. First, and I'm pretty sure you're all aware of this, no one actually died during filming. Steve and Rhys are both alive and well, and Series 5 will be going ahead as planned. Still, this didn't stop Number 9 fans on Wikipedia from updating the actors' profile pages to include details of their untimely deaths. Because if it's on Wikipedia, then it must be true. As for location, Deadline wasn't actually shot at Granada, although it very nearly was. While it's true that they officially closed for filming in 2013, Number 9 had made plans to broadcast from the abandoned studios, but were forced to change the venue at the last minute due to construction work. In the end, that hardly seemed to matter, as viewers naturally assumed that Deadline must be coming live from the haunted sets that were mentioned throughout. Now we come to the content itself, specifically the various pieces of found footage. Each clip was handpicked for a reason and adds something unique to the plot. While some clips were taken straight from the archive, others were fabricated or altered to suit the narrative, with at least one piece that is completely fictitious. We're going to look at each clip in detail and ask ourselves, what is it, how authentic is it, and why was it chosen? Most importantly, what does it mean to the story that Deadline is trying to tell? Clip 1. The Man in the Stocks. This was Bobby Davro's very real accident. which happened in 1992 on the set of the children's programme Public Enemy No. 1. Thanks to a prop malfunction, Davro was thrown headfirst onto the concrete floor and was unable to use his hands to break the fall. He suffered injuries to his face and neck, although the outcome could have been much worse. The Davro clip was later circulated on YouTube, but was never actually broadcast. It was, however, used in health and safety training videos for the BBC, followed by a list of all the things the production team did wrong. While the content itself is authentic, this footage was not actually shot at Granada, and could not be considered part of the curse. This detail was overlooked, as Number 9 really wanted to use the clip, plus it was unlikely that the viewers at home would know any different. The inclusion of the Davro clip reminds the audience that accidents can happen on live TV. It also foreshadows the seemingly fatal injury of Steve Pemberton, which was caused when unseen forces started moving objects. Could those two incidents be connected? Maybe the spirits are claiming responsibility for one or both of these so-called accidents. Clip 2. Most Haunted. Most Haunted was a British paranormal investigation show, which ran from 2002 to 2010, followed by a revival in later years. It followed a crew of presenters, psychic mediums, and historians as they explored locations connected with supernatural activity. The clips in Deadline are taken from the 2005 episode Most Haunted Coronation Street, filmed within the old Granada Studios. While it might have the appearance of a documentary, Most Haunted was classed as an entertainment show, and so we shouldn't take everything they say as fact. However, the historians' accounts of the bodies at St John's does sound plausible. Granada may indeed have been built on top of a burial ground. As for the medium's account of the deceased crew member, this is far more speculative. What's interesting is that the footage is cut to exclude certain details that might have contradicted Number 9's narrative. For instance, the medium was not convinced that the man died in the studios, believing that he may have died at home. He also said that the spirit was friendly and not at all threatening, but that would hardly make for a good ghost story now, would it? The Most Haunted clips are the most on-the-nose references used within Deadline. They establish the curse of Granada and that there were many spirits, not just one, who'd been there long before the studios were even built. For the ghosts, showing this footage would be the most effective way of telling their story. Clip 3. The Man in Black. This short video clip shows CCTV footage of a Roman Catholic priest performing an exorcism. This was said to have happened at Granada back in 2017. Though it's presented without context, we remember that Steve mentioned this incident earlier on. The story of the exorcist, no, not that one, was a thing that actually happened. According to various news sources, the ritual was performed in the lead up to a 3-day festival called Granada Land. The event would act as a send-off for the old studios and would feature performances from live tribute bands. However, rehearsals kept being interrupted by a series of technical malfunctions, and one of the performers complained of a ghostly presence on set. Allegedly, they even threatened to pull out of the show. To resolve the issue and set everyone's minds at ease, the organisers called for a Catholic priest to perform an exorcism, and the festival went ahead as planned. The clip used in Deadline is the genuine footage. The same video was already shared by the online editions of several British tabloids when the story initially broke. Most of these articles cited the Most Haunted episode as further proof that Granada Studios were, in fact, haunted. This bizarre footage added intrigue to the plot of Deadline, as it wasn't immediately obvious what was going on. Steve's story provided just enough information for the audience to figure it out. As for the ghosts of Granada, they might have chosen to show this as an act of defiance, as if they're saying, yes, we heard you, and we're not going anywhere. Even the phrase, you have to leave, echoes the last words spoken by Stephanie Cole. Only this time, it's the living who are being forced to leave, not the dead. Clip 4. The death of Alan Starr. This BBC News report details the suicide of a Granada employee who believed that ghosts were haunting his workplace. We get his name, photo, and even some recordings that appear to show evidence of supernatural activity. The report doesn't have a date, but it appears to be fairly modern, say, from about 10 years ago. This clip is important as it connects many disparate elements depicted in our story so far. The Most Haunted medium described the death of a crew member. Steve mentioned Alan Starr while doing research on his phone. Stephanie spoke with someone named Alan moments before she began acting strangely, and the photo might even seem familiar to those who've been watching closely. Well, I can confirm that this story is 100% false. Alan Starr was a fictional character created by Stephen Rees and was played by an actor named Robin Berry. You can spot him at several points throughout the programme. Alan Starr's background and the idea that his spirit lives on at Granada were inspired in part by the Most Haunted episode and by Mr. Pipes of Ghostwatch fame. Though it may be fake, the BBC News clip is still quite convincing at first glance. However, there is one thing about the Alan Starr story that doesn't add up. Steve claims that Starr died on Halloween night 10 years before the filming of Deadline, giving us the exact date of the 31st of October 2008. The Most Haunted episode was filmed in 2005 and also claims the death occurred 10 years ago, which would place it around 1995. So, bit of a discrepancy there. But who knows, maybe Steve was reading from an old article, or maybe the medium got it wrong and was actually predicting the future. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. Still, the repetition of the phrase 10 years ago resonates quite strongly in the mind of the viewer, so I can see why they chose to overlook this. Alan Starr is established as something of a ringleader among the ghosts. His is the only name revealed, and the only death we hear about in any detail. In life, he understood the technology that gave the ghosts their power, and in death, he is still able to use that technology and communicate directly with the living. His spirit has since become a very strong presence in Granada's afterlife. And they say gingers have no souls. Clip 5. The Granada Fire. Our next clip, which comes right after the Alan Starr report, is another BBC News item, this time from 1984. It shows footage of a raging fire as it engulfs the Granada building. Unlike that last clip, this one is real. And yes, the fire did destroy a great deal of costumes, props and set pieces. Thankfully, no one was injured, but from what I can gather, nobody knows exactly how the fire got started. Whether or not there was talk of a curse back in the day is uncertain. However, the idea fits neatly within the narrative of Deadline, providing more evidence of the supernatural, but this time it demonstrates that the spirits are prone to anger and violence, and nothing says danger quite like a burning building. The report's placement in Deadline, sitting right beside a fake news piece from the same channel, helps to make that last story seem more believable. It gives the whole episode a greater feeling of authenticity, as older viewers might remember the events, and any armchair sleuth could validate it with a quick Google search. The dramatic visuals also help to escalate the threat from the ghosts, saying that this is what happens when you fail to heed their warning. Clip 6. Do you believe in ghosts? This footage comes from a segment on The One Show that aired just a few days before Deadline. Once again, this is real footage from an actual show, but there's a bit more to it than that. If you watch the clip in context, you'll notice some odd framing around this question. They say that Reese and Steve always write about horror, the supernatural and the paranormal, but that's not really the case. While it's true that much of their work is grounded in horror, supernatural elements don't come up that often. Of course, there are exceptions, and certain characters and episodes do break the mould, but for the most part, their surreal and strange world remains grounded in reality. This makes me think that the interview was part of the setup, that they asked The One Show to plant a question about ghosts in their interview. The clip would then be worked into Deadline, and the idea would be fresh in the mind of any viewer who watched the show. Why am I so sure of this? Because the following day, they were at it again. An article about the haunting of Granada, which also happened to mention Inside Number 9's live show, was mysteriously published in The Sun on the 26th. Clearly, they were using different media channels to set up the myth. But what about the clip's meaning within the episode? Personally, I think the spirits were venting their anger towards the non-believer who'd just been chased through a dark studio and thrown to his death. Do you believe in ghosts now, Reese? Clip 7. Back to a Quiet Night In. This one is self-explanatory, but I thought it was worth including. Deadline returns to the replacement episode where it repeats the same short clip over and over again. And that's why I recommended watching A Quiet Night In first. Inside Number 9's second episode was filmed years before the live special was even conceived, so we know it wasn't written for this purpose. It just happens to be an effective visual, and the only episode I can think of where both Steve and Reese's characters are killed on screen. There's even a running joke between them at this point, as it often ends up being Reese's character who kills Steve, not the other way round. One day, Steve will have revenge. So what does this clip achieve within Deadline? First, it shocks the audience with 2 violent killings seconds after we saw the same 2 men having a friendly chat in the sofa. Second, the repetition feels unsettling, as if something is fixating on this gruesome double homicide. Finally, the rising sound and speed indicates an escalation in mood fueled by anger or triumph. Yes, the ghosts killed these men, and they'd do it again too. They leave us on this moment before they deliver their final message, "Let us be." Are the Granada Studios actually haunted? I'll leave that for you to decide, but you don't have to believe in ghosts to enjoy a good ghost story. So that was Inside Number 9's Halloween special. While the tale of a lost mobile phone that lets you talk to the dead might have worked on its own, Deadline turned out to be so much more. I can see this becoming a Halloween tradition where I watch this with someone who has no idea what's going to happen. Big thanks to everyone who requested this episode. I hope I've done it justice, and it's been a fascinating project for me to unpack. As you already know, I'm a huge fan of Inside Number 9, but what you might not know is that I used to work in television archives, so this was a fun trip down memory lane. By the way, whoever did the archive research for this, congratulations, you got my dream job. So, how many of you watched Deadline on broadcast? Did you spot any ghosts that I missed? Were you one of the 20% who turned off the telly? Let's all gather around the comment section and share our spooky tales. Actually, the engagement would be really good for my channel, so yeah, please go ahead. For any Deadline fans who want to go further down this rabbit hole, I have some treats for you. Check the description for clips, interviews and other materials I came across during my research, because we need something to keep us busy until Series 5. Finally, I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Halloween. I plan to keep the spirit alive all year round, so that means more videos, more horror, more analysis, and more Number 9 if that's what you want. Leave a comment below and tell me what you want to see next. As always, please remember to like, subscribe, and ring that bell if you want to hear more. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for more creepy goodness in the future. Till then, good night.